the Legal Corner podcast series. Welcome to today's episode of The Legal Corner, a podcast which covers a variety of legal issues to keep you informed. Hosted by attorney-at-law Colin Dinoon and communications specialist Leonardo Torres.
It's great to be back with you on the Legal Corner podcast series for this, our first episode of season 3. For those of you who do not know by now, I am your host, Colin Dinoon, and it is my pleasure once more to be with you as we journey through our third season. Leonardo will join us in a separate and subsequent episode. But in today's episode, we are going to be looking at the theme, Good Officers, Good Neighbours. Our distinguished guest today is Ms. Gennike Mayers. She describes herself as a language acrobat, and she is the CEO of Interpreting Your Needs Limited, and she's also the author of the book entitled CARICOM, Good Officers, Good Neighbours. Just to tell you a bit about her before I invite her on. So she has mastered 3 key languages in the Caribbean. It would be English, French, and Spanish, with a sprinkling of Haitian Creole. She would have done her studies at the University of the West Indies, attaining a Bachelor of Arts in French, following which she went to Martinique as part of the English Assistant Program. While there, she was able to work with a change management firm, which enabled her to comprehend complex workplaces and diffuse conflicts before they erupted. She also attained a master's in communications and has been involved in many international scenarios wearing diverse hats, including the 2009 Summit of the Americas and CHOGM, which were both hosted in Port au Prince, Trinidad and Tobago, the 2010 earthquake emergency response, the Rohingya refugee response in Bangladesh, Cyclone Idai recovery operations led by UNOPS in Zimbabwe, and the 43rd CARICOM Summit in Suriname, attended by the UN Secretary General. Ms. Mayers started Interpreting Your Needs to provide multilingual project management services from her home in tranquil Tobago. All right, so good day to you, Ms. Mayers, and welcome to the Legal Corner podcast series.
Good day, Colin, and thank you so much for the introduction. Thanks for the invitation to be on your program.
Lovely. It's great to have you. We're going to get right into it. I would like you to tell us, what is CARICOM and what role does it play in the Caribbean region?
So CARICOM is the abbreviated form of the Caribbean Community. And as the name implies, it is a community of Caribbean territories that have banded together to work on a number of areas. Maybe just to give a little bit of history for those younger ones who might not have had the benefit of this at school. CARICOM is often referred to as the phoenix that arose out of the failed British West Indian Federation. And so it was created July 4th, 1973. That Caribbean community created here in Trinidad and Tobago by the Treaty of Chaguaramas in Trinidad. And that was really the start of this Caribbean community of Caribbean nations working together on a number of areas. Of interest, those areas of cooperation are very vast, and perhaps we are only familiar with just a few of them, the most common ones being, of course, tourism, because tourism is very important to most of the Caribbean economies. But there's so many other areas, for instance, agriculture. We collaborate as well on crime and security. For those of us in Trinidad and Tobago, we may have heard a lot about the CARICOM impacts. That's the CARICOM security agency that would have taken place in Trinidad recently. CARICOM members collaborate and cooperate as well in the areas of education, energy, sustainable development, foreign policy, gender, health is another big one coming out of COVID. One of the agencies that I think doesn't get a lot of credit for what it has done is CARFA. So that's a big CARICOM agency, CARFA, and a huge area of cooperation, as well as human development, ICTs, statistics, trade. Let's not forget transport. Traveling throughout the Caribbean region can sometimes be a bit difficult, but it is an area of cooperation that our leaders are working on. And of course, youth development. Those would be the key areas of cooperation.
Which nations are members of CARICOM?
So CARICOM has 15 full members, member states, and 5 associate members. So in alphabetical order, we start with all the way up in the north, Antigua and Barbuda, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, which is in Central America, Dominica, Grenada, Guyana, located on South American continent, Haiti, the only French-speaking member of CARICOM, Jamaica, Montserrat, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Suriname, which is also located on the South American continent, and of course, Trinidad and Tobago. And as I mentioned earlier, there are associate members, so 15 full members and 5 associate members, which are Anguilla, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos, and at the recently completed CARICOM meeting, which took place here in Trinidad and Tobago, we heard declarations that there are 2 more members that are being considered for associate membership, and those are Curacao and Martinique. So not yet finalized, but it did come up on the agenda of the CARICOM heads of government discussions this year.
Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, we have been directly affected by the economic and political crisis in Venezuela. For those of you who may not be fully aware, the situation in Venezuela really began to deteriorate after the last elections, where the results were disputed and the United States would have imposed sanctions upon the Venezuelan economy. And those sanctions would have, combined with other things, would have led to tremendous hardship being faced by members of the Venezuelan population, and many of them would have migrated to other Latin American countries in Central America, the Caribbean, and even further afield. So I would like you to tell us, what role has CARICOM played in the Venezuelan political crisis?
Thanks for that question, Colin. And it is at the heart of my book, CARICOM, Good Officers, Good Neighbours. CARICOM being a good neighbor in itself, because Venezuela is not a CARICOM member, but it is one of our biggest neighbors, just south, South America, just south of the Caribbean basin. And so as a good neighbor, CARICOM has been involved to a certain extent in trying to mediate in that crisis. So initially, just before the presidential elections in 2018 that you referred to, CARICOM was actually invited to observe those elections. I think your listeners would be familiar with elections around the world, where there might be some hesitation or some issues about security and so forth. Election observers are invited to come and observe the elections so that there can be some measure of external condoning of what's happening, or external observation of what's happening. And so CARICOM was actually invited by the government of Venezuela to observe those elections in 2018. Those elections took place in May. And I'd have to say, following the elections, and you mentioned the U.S. earlier and sanctions and so forth, within the Organization of American States, that's another hemispheric regional representation body, there were claims that the elections were illegitimate and that the results of the elections would not be recognized by the OAS. CARICOM at that time, having been involved in observing the process, though they did not come out strongly to make any grand declarations about the legitimacy or not of those elections. They did, however, have a meeting after the elections in early in 2019, whereby the Caribbean leaders, CARICOM leaders, agreed to offer mediation to Venezuela because, the coming out of the results of the elections, there was a lot of upheaval in the country, and as you mentioned earlier, people started migrating out of Venezuela. So CARICOM did offer mediation services or mediation offices, as we say, good offices, and thereafter we did see public communications coming out of CARICOM with regard to Venezuela. Now, I should caution that CARICOM has always advocated for non-interference and non-intervention, meaning Venezuela is a sovereign state, and therefore CARICOM leaders agreed that nobody, no other state, no other nation should be interfering or intervening in Venezuela at a time where in other areas of the world you had other sovereign countries who were publicly speaking about military intervention and offering humanitarian assistance, but we would have seen publicly that humanitarian assistance from certain quarters was deemed to be interference. And so CARICOM, I would say, played a very instrumental card at that time in remaining neutral in the region, in the midst of all of these voices that were prognosticating and calling for all kinds of different things, notably for the dismissal or for the dismissal of President Maduro, calling for Juan Guaido to be acknowledged as the real president, legitimate president. But CARICOM stayed clear of that confusion and remained a very neutral voice in the space, in the global space, I would say. And thereafter, as you mentioned earlier in your introduction, some Caribbean nations, some CARICOM member states have been playing host to Venezuelan migrants who made the choice to leave their country. Trinidad and Tobago being one of those countries, also Suriname and Guyana, because they are so close geographically to Venezuela on the South American continent. They too have been welcoming Venezuelan neighbors who have, in different regards, settled in to those countries. There have been Venezuelans traveling to other countries in the Caribbean, but the main countries who have been hosting Venezuelan migrants are the ones that I mentioned. So in a very concrete way, that's how CARICOM neighbors have been supporting Venezuela and supporting Venezuelans in what continues to be a crisis that's ongoing, political and economic.
At this point, we'll take a quick break and we'll be right back. Welcome back and thank you for staying with us. Ms. Mayers, before the break, you were just giving us a good perspective on the role that CARICOM has played in the political crisis in Venezuela. So I want you to tell us now, has the Venezuelan government been receptive to the overtures of CARICOM?
Yes, the government has welcomed CARICOM teams, as I said, both pre the elections, but also thereafter. And I can only comment on what has been made known publicly, because, of course, I don't work with the bowels of CARICOM. But certainly, CARICOM has continued to advocate on behalf of Venezuela in other fora, like the United Nations, like the Organization of American States. So, yes, on the one hand, Venezuela is receptive of the assistance that CARICOM has provided, as we mentioned earlier, both in terms of hosting Venezuelans who have chosen to leave, but also in bringing attention to the situation in Venezuela as our next door neighbor. I think that is an area of support that should not be overlooked, because it does take some grit to advocate on behalf of a country who, in this case, is not a member of CARICOM. Yet, CARICOM leaders have been using their voice individually and collectively to advocate on behalf of Venezuela, to advocate regarding dropping sanctions, humanitarian assistance, and also services to Venezuelans who are now living abroad, in providing those humanitarian services to them, and providing, as in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, we have an excellent example where Venezuelans have been afforded a registration process whereby they have identity documents, they are allowed to work, the children are allowed to go to school. So those are also within, I would say, the umbrella of CARICOM's support to Venezuela.
How would you say that the present crisis in Venezuela can be resolved?
That is the $1 million question that I think
I know that's a hard question.
I think all of our CARICOM leaders are asking that question, and certainly for those of us who interact with Venezuelans in our midst, and of course the Venezuelans who are still in Venezuela and who are experiencing difficult conditions there. But from my own perspective, and this is strictly my opinion, I think we do need to band together more as Caribbean territories, Caribbean neighbors, to advocate even more fervently on behalf of Venezuela. And not to get too contentious, but a lot of voices out there in the public domain contend that the U.S. sanctions on Venezuela are, not really justifiable, and certainly would go a long way if those sanctions were removed to allow Venezuela the breathing room, so to speak, to reestablish its economy. We're well aware as well locally in Trinidad and Tobago, where there were talks of even our country being sort of sidelined because we dared to express support for Venezuela, notably with the Dragon deal, the Dragon field deal between Venezuela and ourselves. And so I think we need to continue pushing, advocating on behalf of our neighbors who, I have to say, they have been very supportive of the wider Caribbean region. Trinidad and Tobago has not necessarily had the need to rely on Venezuela for oil and gas, but certainly through the Petro-Caribe initiative, where Venezuela was providing fuel to a lot of the smaller Caribbean territories, they have benefited from this big neighbor in the south. And now I think it's only fair that these countries should use their voice to support that very same neighbor who stretched out a hand to them to help them when they were in need. So, as we say in Trinidad, it takes two hands to clap. I think that's what we need to continue doing to bring resolution to this crisis in Venezuela. Certainly, the Venezuelan government appears to be receptive of that kind of assistance. And so I think this would be the direction that we should go in, completely and continually staying away from interference and staying away from intervention, particularly military intervention, as was floated publicly over the last few years.
Okay, we're going to switch gears now into your book, CARICOM, Good Officers, Good Neighbors. It's a book that I read. I enjoyed it. I found that you succinctly express the status quo in Venezuela. You provided a historical context, and you also provided some suggestions for the way forward. So I want you to tell us, what was the rationale behind the publication of your book?
Thank you, Colin, for taking the time to read it. It's not exactly a leisurely read. It's quite a thick or intense book, and so I appreciate you taking the time. To answer your question, the rationale is very simple. I did not set out to write a book. I was actually writing my dissertation for Masters in Diplomacy, which I did in 2019, 2020. And coming out of the dissertation, I had an offer from a publisher that I was in contact with 10 years prior, who had expressed interest 10 years prior in publishing another book on another dissertation. And so it was just the right timing. And I would just say that God is good, and everything conspired to turn the dissertation into my first book. And thereafter, I thought, this book speaks to CARICOM, but it speaks about Venezuela, and so I wanted to give Spanish speakers access to what was being written in this book, and so I decided to translate it into Spanish, mainly for the Venezuelan audience, but also because we have Haiti as one of our largest CARICOM members by virtue of their 12 million population. I thought, let me translate it as well into French so that our Haitian neighbors who are part of CARICOM could also have access to the book. And so there you have it, from having no intention of writing a book to having a book that's now published in English, French, and Spanish.
How can persons purchase your book?
So locally, there are a few copies of the book available at book specialists in Port of Spain, but also at paper-based bookstore at the Normandy Hotel in St. Anne's, and online for your international audience, regional and international audience. It is available. The English version is available on Amazon. The Spanish version is available at, I'll have to give you that link, but it can be Googled for those who are interested. And the French version is a strictly online publication that's been published by publishers in Senegal, and it's also available for online purchase. If you do a Google search on it, CARICOM, Good Offices, Good Neighbours, it should be easy to find there.
Now, we share something in common, which is a love for languages. As many persons may know, I am fluent in Spanish, and I can also speak Portuguese. I can speak French. I can speak Brazilian Portuguese. So what would you say is the benefit of someone learning a foreign language?
Well, I'll throw that right back at you, Colin, because you're a lawyer. How has it been useful to you, even in your profession? I want to say that learning a language is giving yourself an additional communications channel to communicate with many more people. It's a channel, it's a key, it's a tool for communicating with people who don't speak your native tongue. That's what it has always been for me. And so I throw the question back at you. How has it been useful to you to master Spanish and Portuguese, given what you do?
Well, for me, it has helped me in my career in terms of meeting foreign language clients. But even before that, learning a language has opened up a whole new world to me. So in terms of the South American continent, having friends and really professional relationships there. And it has exposed me to different cultures and has helped to make me a more well-rounded individual. So I would highly recommend learning another language. Sometimes we English speakers, they talk about the arrogance of English. So anywhere we go,
Yes.
we think that persons will speak English. So there's no need to learn another language. But I would say no. Invest in learning another language because you can better connect with persons when you are in their space, or even when they come here and you are having a conversation with them.
I absolutely agree with all that you've said, Colin. And if you just permit me to dovetail on two things you've mentioned. One is being able to reach out to people when you are in their space. There is just a difference in the communication and how you are treated when you address a foreigner in their language. it's I don't want to say it's flattery, but when you go to a person's country and you speak their language, you get a different welcome. Likewise, when you have foreigners in your midst, foreigners who come to visit us here, it is part of our hospitality. And Trinidad and Tobago folks were known for being very warm, very hospitable. But when you add on a foreign language to that hospitality and you're able to greet the Venezuelans in the supermarket, the persons who are washing your car, packing the groceries, the persons you meet in the hospital, a lot of right here in Tobago, I've met so many medical professionals in the hospital, Cubans, Venezuelans, and being able to have that conversation with them in their language, it just changes. It changes the tone of the interaction. So I want to encourage your listeners to learn a language, whatever it is, and regardless of what you may be doing professionally, having mastery of a foreign language, it just opens up so many more doors for you personally, as you said, in terms of friendships, but also professionally. It gives you a one-up when you are job hunting. The fact that you speak a foreign language, it gives the employer some added value that they may not get with somebody else who speaks only one language.
As we get ready to wrap up, Ms. Mayers, I'd just like to give you an opportunity to talk to us about your business, interpreting your needs and the services that you provide, and the manner in which persons can contact you.
Thanks again, Colin. So Interpreting Your Needs is a language services bureau based in the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, physically anchored in Tobago. And of course, coming out of COVID, where so many of these multilingual meetings have gone online, we are able to service clients across the globe from our humble base here in Tobago. And so apart from interpreting for meetings, whether it's business meetings, conferences, what have you, we also provide translation services. That's translation of documents, whether it is certificates, regular administrative documents, books, websites, promotional material, whatever have you. And last but not least, multilingual communication services. Because I have a double background in communications and languages, I also bring to my clients that ability to develop communication strategies, communication plans for different target markets of non-English speakers. So I can be contacted via my website, interpretingyourneeds.com. Also, another outlet to contact me is on LinkedIn. LinkedIn, as you say, is the place where business people socialize. And so I love to interact with people on LinkedIn. You can just look for my profile, Gennike Mayers, on LinkedIn, and also by email, which is interpretingyourneeds@gmail.com.
Okay, Ms. Mayers, this has been a great conversation. All best wishes to you.
Gracias, igualmente.
Thank you for listening to the Legal Corner podcast series. For more information, please visit us at our Facebook or Instagram pages or send your comments to thelegalcornerpodcast@gmail.com. We look forward to hearing from you.